President Trump was in Tampa, Florida Tuesday, where he encouraged voters to head to the polls in November. The president gave a hearty endorsement for Republican Representative Ron DeSantis as he makes a bid for Florida governor. DeSantis will face off against State Agriculture Commissioner Adam Putnam in the state's primary later this month. Mr. Trump also touted his economic and trade policies.
We've taken the toughest ever actions in response to China's abusive trade practices. And we're doing very well with China, very well. And I have a lot of respect for China. And I have tremendous respect for President Xi of China. But this has been too many years of abuse. $500 billion a year. $500 billion. We've helped rebuild China. We can't do that anymore. We can't do that anymore. And our farmers understand it, and our workers understand it, and frankly, our companies understand it.
Niall Stanage is a White House columnist at The Hill. He joins me now from Washington. All right, Niall, is there concern among Republicans that the president's trade policies could hurt the party ahead of the midterms?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's particular concern, Elaine, that could happen in so-called purple districts, competitive districts, and some of the states in the middle of the country that are really open to being hurt by these policies. That's why the president announced this $12 billion aid program to farmers just last week. This is a real concern for Republicans, particularly if those policies bite in all the wrong ways in the run-up to the midterm elections.
Well, the president, as we just saw, is endorsing Florida Governor Rick Scott, who's looking to unseat Democratic Senator Bill Nelson. Interestingly, Governor Scott did not attend Tuesday's rally, and you touch on this in your latest column, but are we going to see more Republican candidates distancing themselves or keeping themselves at a bit of an arm's length at various turns from this president ahead of the midterms?
We are, for sure, because the president is a very divisive figure. Now, clearly there are a lot of people who love what he does, are very fervent supporters of his, but there are equally many, if not more, people who are very fervent in their opposition. If you look at a state like Florida, a perennial battleground state, I think that's why Rick Scott is keeping his distance. You look at the polls, Rick Scott is in a dogfight. That's anyone's race down there, where he's trying to supplant the incumbent Democratic Senator Bill Nelson. So he's not rushing into President Trump's embrace right now. But it's a very delicate line people like Rick Scott have to walk. They need the loyal Republicans, the base that comes out for Donald Trump, but they need more than that. And that therein, I think, lies the difficulty.
Careful political calculation. Well, the president also touted his pick for the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh scored support from Republican Senator Rand Paul Tuesday. Is the White House confident he'll get enough support?
Yes, this is one of the areas where they are more confident. And it goes back to last year, where there was also a Supreme Court nominee and confirmation that went relatively smoothly. And that was seen as one of the most competent or conventional moves the White House had made. The Supreme Court is clearly a critical issue. Obviously, Brett Kavanaugh will receive very fervent opposition from Democrats and Liberals. But conservatives who kind of, frankly, had to hold their nose to vote for President Trump in the first place, one of the things one hears them cite again and again is the importance of the Supreme Court to them. The idea of getting someone like Brett Kavanaugh confirmed and really shifting the ideological balance of the court to the right is something that is welcomed by conservatives all across the spectrum of the centre-right to the harder edges of the right.
Switching topics, in a tweet Tuesday, the president doubled down on his calls for immigration reform, calling a government shutdown a, quote, very small price to pay. But, Niall, what could the political costs of that look like?
It could be a very serious political cost. Obviously, we have seen government shutdowns in recent years. Typically, those have blown back against those who have pushed them in the first place. It hasn't tended to be a very successful tactic. There is no noticeable enthusiasm for it among Republicans in Capitol Hill. And I also think there's a really crucial point here, Elaine, which is that the Republicans are in control of the White House and the House of Representatives and the Senate. They have unified government. If the government then shuts down, it would seem pretty clear that they would be blamed by voters. That's why you're seeing lawmakers on Capitol Hill not enthusiastic about this idea that the president is advancing at all.
Finally, Niall, CBS News has learned Chief of Staff John Kelly is expected to stay in his position through 2020. That would make him one of the longest-serving chiefs of staff in recent history. Is that a sign that the relationship between Kelly and President Trump has been smoothed over?
To some extent, it is. The news that broke today was something of a surprise to me and to many other people who report on the White House, because John Kelly's authority, by all accounts, has lessened since he first took the job of Chief of Staff a year ago. This announcement does suggest that perhaps having reached a nadir a while ago, the relationship between himself and Trump has improved slightly. I have to say, Elaine, here in Washington and around the White House and President Trump's orbit, there is some scepticism as to whether he will really last until 2020. But clearly the announcement points to some level of recovery within that relationship.
All right. Niall Stanage in Washington for us. Niall, thanks very much.
Always a pleasure.